Hey everybody, welcome to the PC Perspective Mailbag. This is episode 55, being recorded on August 17th, 2018. I don't know why I did that full intro, but we're back. We're here. We're going to do another episode for you. Excuse me while I open my water. Thank you. Let's see. First question. Michael Thurer asks, how likely are SATA cable failures? I've had 2 cable failures in my RAID. Is this uncommon? Did I just get a bunch of bad cables? Are there specific cable grades or manufacturers that are better? Also, how could a SATA cable fail? Conductive or insulation degradation? I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you that we have plenty of SATA cables that turn out to be garbage and fall apart and stuff. They don't really fall apart, but they get loose. The connectors get loose if you're using them a lot. And a lot of times, SATA cables are just cheap and common enough that it's the first thing you swap out, right? And so if it suddenly starts working again, whatever, you just throw that other one away and you kind of move on. Would you say that? Would you agree, Alan? Are SATA cables just kind of just bad cables? It's a tiny connector and very important. A lot of data has to go through them, right? And they don't. I don't know. The ones that come in motherboards are usually the lowest quality that exists. So I don't know if that means I would recommend anybody go on Amazon or Newegg and buy other ones and or just have extra around. The benefit is if the SATA cable stops working, it's not like your SSD is broken. You just replace it as long as you have another one and your machine will reboot. Except for that whole thing about if it does it while you're using the PC and it locks up, that would be bad, I guess. But I would say their SATA cable failures are more common than you might have thought before. Umbra sorry about that, asks, how beneficial is tiered storage for an average consumer? Considering that storage spaces comes free with Windows 10, how good is it? How does it compare to alternatives like StoreMI and Fuse Drive? We were doing some talking right before I recorded this, and I would say that I don't know. So the default version of Windows 10 doesn't support the tiering capability of storage spaces. It supports parity and redundancy, but it doesn't do tiering in the way that I think you're referring to tiering, which is kind of accelerating performance with faster drives on slower drives. StoreMI is kind of the most recent thing that has been doing this. It's the one that's getting a lot of attention. AMD bundling it with the X470 series motherboards and now the Threadripper boards as well can utilize it. The idea is pretty simple. If you have a hard drive and you have an SSD, then you put it into this tiered system and the software is smart enough to move the data that is most commonly used to the SSD, like your operating system boot files, any applications you're constantly loading, games, what have you, and then the stuff that you use less often, less frequently onto the hard drive for that. You can also see that tiering allows you to have accelerated write speeds, and then it will convert or move that data over to the slower hard drive in the background if it turns out you're not using it very frequently. So I think StoreMI works pretty well. It is obviously StoreMI is only for AMD platforms, but you can buy Fuse Drive and put it on an Intel platform, or you can put it on anything really. The Optane caching is another good solution, but it only works with Optane drives. It's got a limit of 64 gig cache. You obviously have to have one of those supported Intel platforms, and it's not really a tiered system in that regard. It is a pure caching system in that if the Optane drive were to suddenly go bad and disappear, a system reboot, all of your data is there. With the StoreMI system out of the box, it's all one drive. It's not duplicating the data of the SSD onto the hard drive. So if the SSD were to die, then it'd be like your OS drive dying, right? You would still lose that data. So obviously backing up is still very important, and making sure all your important data is on external drives or saved to the cloud or what have you. Third question, Magic 8-Ball wants to know, what does your personal Magic 8-Ball say about the gaming PC ecosystem? Will the next gen consoles totally take over the lower and mid-tier gaming PC market? I'm sure this has been incorrectly predicted before. I'll take my stab at it. But upcoming factors like keyboard and mouse support make it feel different this time. So I feel like if it's going to happen, it's going to happen now. The consoles, the Xbox One X, the PS4 Pro are very powerful machines, very competent gaming systems. And as we see more and more games be cross-platform, right? Not just that you can play multiplayer across it, but that they exist on Windows, they exist on Microsoft Store, they exist on the Xbox and the PlayStation. I think that's a more likely outcome, especially because of the cost advantage that you get. An Xbox One X is more powerful for your dollar than a comparable gaming PC. Now that obviously changes over time, and the longer the Xbox One X is on the market, the more likely it is that a gaming PC will be able to outperform it for the same price point. But that's one of the benefits of consoles. You have a different software driver layer, different OS layer, and so there's a lot of advantages, especially when you get down to the lower cost hardware where the efficiency of consoles is even more beneficial. I don't think the PC gaming ecosystem is going to go away. I think you've got a player like NVIDIA, who is obviously very large in this space, that is not in those major consoles, and thus has is very driven to maintain the PC gaming ecosystem. So whether that be new features like AI processing or ray tracing or GeForce Experience or GeForce Now cloud-based gaming or what have you, they have a lot of reasons to make sure that you are staying away from consoles and that you have the better experience, whether it be on your display or on the portability of the gaming or on just the visual quality of the gaming, to keep that PC ecosystem around. And that mid-range part, even though it's not the highest price, not the highest margin, is the largest revenue stream because of its quantity. So I don't think it's going to go away completely. I still think you'll sell, plenty of 1160s or 2060s or what have you, whatever the next GPU launch is from NVIDIA. And so I don't really see this PC gaming ecosystem really falling off. Kate Wolf asks, given the roadmap for Ryzen, what do you think the core count of the PlayStation 5 or Xbox Scarlett will be when they're released in 2 years' time? This is important as these values will form the minimum spec of PC gaming for years to come and may move gaming back to a more CPU-based model. Bonus question. Do you think AMD will cut Sony and Microsoft a special deal for higher core count processor to increase the pain for Intel? So we can combine all this discussion into one thing. The next generation PlayStation and Xbox, after the ones we have now, will very likely be, unless something drastic happens, Intel has been rumored to be fighting to get into this space, but unless something very drastic changes in the next couple of years, will be AMD APU-based parts, right? Ryzen Zen-based processor cores and Vega or Navi-based graphics cores. As for the amount of processing for each, I think in 2 years' time, it probably won't be necessary for us to go beyond a quad-core part with hyperthreading, or I keep saying hyperthreading, a quad-core part with 8 threads enabled on a Ryzen processor for the console space, as long as you have adequate GPU performance. And if you can implement other features in that GPU, like AI processing or what have you, that can maybe offload some of the AI compute from the CPU, then the necessity of having higher core counts might be mitigated sometime. Do I think that will affect kind of the minimum spec of the PC gaming for years to come? I felt that way when the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 were announced, that it was going to somehow fundamentally change how the PC gaming ecosystem was viewed by developers, and it didn't really happen. AMD had the potential, I think, to have a big advantage in that way, that console gamers, or console game developers rather, would be focusing their attention on this architecture and the specific traits of these GPUs and what they could do, and that would carry over to the PC space. And it didn't really happen, whether that be because of initiative from AMD or because NVIDIA was just such a dominant leader in the market share of the gaming PC, the gaming GPU space for the PC. And I don't predict that that's going to change drastically inside the next 2 years. It could. AMD could just, next year come out with a incredibly important and powerful and efficient and cost beneficial graphics chip that takes over the PC market and gets them back to 50-50, but I think it's going to be tough to do in any time span between now and the next hard launch of next-gen consoles. As for do I think AMD will cut Sony and Microsoft a special deal? Sure. I'm sure there would be negotiations happening that they would want to keep that position. It's very important for their semi-custom division and revenue that they have. And AMD is growing in pretty much all areas at this point, and any kind of cutback on their revenue stream would be seen as a negative, and you don't want to do that if you're AMD. You know, they've already had to deal with the cryptocurrency market and that kind of falter. So avoiding anything in the console space would also be a plus. Question from Unique Photo Vid asks, can you provide GPU recommendations for 1440p ultrawide video editing and gaming? And in my opinion, are HDR 21:9 panels worth the premium? I don't HDR 21:9 panels. I would say anything that exists today, no, because we are just now starting to get into the world of HDR panels that exist in a way that I would be comfortable even recommending them, right? So, the G-Sync HDR panel is one. There are a couple of FreeSync 2 monitors that are coming out that are much better implementations of HDR that I'd recommend. Those might be worth the premium. As for what's available in 21:9 today, I'd say probably not. If I'm looking at GPU recommendations for 1440p, I don't really want to recommend anything to you today on August 16th, 2018, because there are new GPUs coming, right? And I think based on NVIDIA's announcements this week at SIGGRAPH that's definitely the case. We can just make the assumption there's going to be some GeForce cards announced as well. And so making a recommendation for 1440p for you to buy something today would be, I think, the wrong move. If there were no GPUs coming out, I would probably tell you the GTX 1080 to get 3440 by 1440 and have high refresh rate, high frame rate going on it. So keep that in mind when the new GPUs are launched and announced, either the price reduction of a GTX 1080 and or what GPU is replacing the 1080 in terms of the dollar amount, right? So maybe you could get a little bit of extra performance out of it because of that. So a question from Scott Baker Temp asks, has the TR4 socket issue been fixed? I'd like to build a Threadripper server, but I can't justify spending so much money on potentially breaking the CPU and motherboard during assembly. I don't think this is as widespread of an issue as the question is kind of implying. I don't think there was a TR4 socket issue where there may be some that were faulty and made installation a little bit more difficult. Thus, people had to use more force to install them and maybe broke some sockets and some PCBs and cost themselves some money. That I don't think is a widespread issue. We haven't seen any of that here. I haven't had reports of it, questions or comments about it in any of the reviews we've done. I wouldn't have that holding you back. There might be some of the new motherboards like the MSI Meg might have a new revision of the socket or something, but I don't know if it's meant to or is addressing any of those potential concerns. Question from Also Quiet asks, why doesn't Intel make RAM? It's a good question. Why don't they make a ton of things, right? I think a lot of people, when Intel was first entering into the modern era of flash storage, they were wondering why they were doing it. Intel could, in theory, make DRAM for at their foundries and use it as another way to take advantage of capacity if they had open space. I think from Intel's standpoint, there's Samsung, there's Micron, there's SK Hynix. There's a lot of competition in this space that are doing that primarily. There's also a lot of volatility in the space. Not that there's not in the flash market as well, but there's a lot of volatility in DRAM and highs and lows. Like, if you'd been making DRAM for the last year or two, you'd been rolling in bank, right? So, but now we're starting to hear rumors that there's going to be maybe a glut of extra flash and DRAM coming out, and prices are going to be dropping soon. So Intel could do it. Do I think they need to? No. Is it a market that's maybe a little bit too commoditized for them to differentiate in? Probably. So if I were them, that's probably where I would stay out of. Let's see. You got time for a couple more. Metroid Hacker asks, have you ever tried completely negative pressure for a PC case? I'm going to try having all of my case fans suck air out except the top fan, which I'm going to put a filter in to keep the dust out, along with any other major openings to see how it affects temps. I haven't done any direct testing on this very recently, but a lot of the general consensus and theory from testing from others is that there's not really a significant performance difference between negative pressure and positive pressure designs. I think your idea here is you're trying to keep the inside of your case as clean as possible, so the top of the case would, in theory, get less dirt and dust and animal hair or whatever you have in your house, getting sucked up into the chassis, so that's probably a good idea. The only thing you have to worry about is if there is enough airflow. Alan pointed out before this question, before I started recording, that like the turbulence of fans kind of blowing in different areas can create cooling capability for those passive components, whether it be your power delivery on your GPU or your CPU or any storage devices you have. So you make sure, as long as you have adequate airflow, the positive, negative, I don't think is going to make a huge difference in your temperatures. But if you find something else, I'd love for you to follow up and let me know. It'd be interesting. VTN Wesley asks, GPU prices GPU prices finally seem to be normalizing a bit. When will RAM prices go back to normal? It seems like we're kind of in that direction as well. I expect things to be dropping a little bit if, again, those stories and rumors of kind of memory inventory build up and flash memory build up kind of happening simultaneously. Trust me, we'd like to see those RAM prices go back down, so you're not paying $180, $200 for 16 gigs of memory for your PC. So hopefully soon. I don't have a specific answer for you. I think it will be soon. So I think that's going to be it for me for this week. Thanks, guys, for joining us. If you want to find all the previous episodes on this, you can just go to PCPer.com. If you have a question for us, please leave them in the comments to the YouTube video and or the comments on PCPer.com that this video is embedded on, and we'll go through those questions and answer some in the next episode. And I think it might be Alan or Josh for next week, so keep that in mind as your questions there, as Ken and I will be over in Germany for the Gamescom and NVIDIA events. But I imagine you'll have a lot of questions following next week's NVIDIA news, so I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion in a week or two. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and see you next time.